Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the news headlines here, Monday, the 26th of January. Can you believe it's nearly the end of January already? Soon we'll be seeing Easter eggs in the shops and we'll be going around saying it'll be Christmas soon. Anyway, it's a bit of a slow news day today, so I've done my best trawling through all of those publications for you to find something a little bit juicy. It's not been great, but let's go straight in to the news headlines for you. So I'm starting with LettingAgentToday, and the headline here is "Ditch the politicians, let the property experts run national housing policy." Well, to be perfectly honest with you, that's the most sensible thing I've heard in the news for a very, very long time. And it's something that I've been saying for a very, very long time. And I do think that the problem we have is there are too many career politicians running this country with no clue of how to actually do their job. Whereas if you had people that had been in an industry for some period of time, understood it, they would be able to run that particular sector better. I always said that when we were having Brexit, whether you agreed with it or whether you didn't, it would have made more sense to have people like Alan Sugar or Richard Branson doing those negotiations, because they have a business brain and they negotiate every day of the week, rather than someone like Boris Johnson going in and talking about Peppa Pig and how great Britain is because of Peppa Pig World. I mean, not really the negotiating stance we were looking for. But anyway, I digress. The article here in LettingAgentToday says, Chief Executive of one of the UK's largest agency groups wants figures from across the industry, including letting agents, to run the country's housing policy. Yes. And he wants to ditch the idea of elected governments having responsibility for rental, sales and house build rules. David Powell, the chief executive of Andrews Property Group, says that the decades the housing system in the UK has been treated as a political football. He's not wrong. It's never top of anyone's agenda. It really isn't. He cites the revolving door of housing ministers. Well, yeah, I mean, we've had more housing ministers than Katie Price has had engagement rings. You know what I mean? There's a lot. And failure to keep housing supply in the tune with demand is two of the many ways politicians have failed. And in a statement over the weekend, Mr. Powell says, housing policy is too important, too complex and too long-term to be left to the whims of central government. I absolutely agree. Instead, he proposes something radically different. Well, at least he's come up with a solution rather than just a rant. If the UK is serious about solving the housing crisis, it needs to structure built for the long haul. Absolutely, not just the 5 years you're in power until somebody else comes in to fix the problem. That means removing housing oversight from central government and establishing a central national housing committee. He says such a committee would be independent, a specialist body representing every corner of the housing ecosystem. I like that, housing ecosystem. I might steal that. That would include letting agents, tenant groups, charities, estate agents, developers, conveyancers, lenders, removal firms and social housing providers. Powell goes on to say, this is the full spectrum of people who understand the system not as an abstract policy area, but as daily reality. They say the bottleneck, the inefficiencies and unintended consequences of poorly designed legislation is the backbone of the problem. They know where the system breaks and how it could be rebuilt, but nobody bothers to do it. Powell insists housing requires a 20 to 30 year strategy, not a 2 to 3 year political cycle. He's not wrong. Long-term objectives. Oh, he's got a long-term objective and everything. He says his committee, he's setting up the committee. He says his committee could set long-term building targets, insulating from policy and political turbulence, standardise planning framework across regions, ensure consistent regional regulations for landlords, tenants and developers, coordinate supply chains and workforce planning, provide stability for investors and lenders, and focus on outcomes rather than headlines. I like that. And he concludes by saying the current housing crisis is the product of a structural failure, political short termism and fragmented decision making. I mean, he's not wrong, is he? He's literally hit the nail on the head there. And he concludes with, housing should not be a ministerial stepping stone. It should be a national mission led by people who understand it. I absolutely agree with him. I think that would be the way forward. Can you imagine if we actually had people in Parliament that knew how to do their jobs? The people in charge of defence, for example, having actually served in the military. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Housing department actually having people in there that work in housing. Can you imagine? Imagine how quickly we'd get that shit done. Anyway, I've got to be careful what I say today because I got banned from TikTok for 24 hours over the weekend because I called Matthew Pennycook something that I shouldn't have called him. The thing is, I didn't even swear. Do you know what I mean? Didn't even swear. Just voicing my opinion. Don't voice your opinion on TikTok. Anyway, moving on to IntroducerToday. We haven't looked at IntroducerToday before, so this is a new publication for me, although it has been around for quite some time. And this headline is, buy-to-let mortgages demand soars despite sector challenges. That sounds quite a dramatic headline, doesn't it? New figures from the lenders body UK Finance show a modest recovery in the buy-to-let mortgage market. The data refers to third quarter of 2025, the latest information available. In Q3 of 2025, there were just over 60,000 new buy-to-let mortgages in the UK worth 10.9 billion. This was up quite significantly compared with the same quarter of the previous year. The average gross buy-to-let rental yield for the quarter 3 of 2025 was 7.1% compared to 6.9% of the same quarter the previous year. That's quite good. So there's an increase. It's slow, but an increase is good. And I think a slow, steady increase is very, very good. Reflecting the downward movement in interest rates, the average buy-to-let interest cover ratio for the UK was 215%. That sounds a lot, but actually it's not that dramatic from the same quarter of the previous year, which was 195%. So not too dramatic. So some good news there in the buy-to-let market. And I see that there are more buy-to-let lenders, or more lenders, full stop, that are bringing down their interest rates and opening up more products to first-time buyers, taking into account tenant rent paying over just your credit history and just a bank statement saying, look, I've paid my rent for the last however many years on time and in full. I think rent should be something that's put against your credit history, the same as your mortgage payments, the same as your credit cards, because it's one of the biggest payments that you pay on a monthly basis and it has no reflection on your credit. I think that's awful. Unless you voluntarily sign up to something like Credit Ladder or something like that, I think it should be part and parcel of your credit history. Now I'm moving on to PropertyInvestorToday, and the headline here is monthly milestone rent figures reached in property investment hotspot. So this is talking about Northern Ireland. We don't normally dip into other countries because I like to stay in the English housing law, but I did think this was quite interesting and wonder if this is something that might kind of step over the water a little. The average monthly rent on a house in Northern Ireland reached the landmark 1,000 for the first time in the fourth quarter of 2025, according to website PropertyPal. Rental costs have continued to trend upwards in recent years, with average rents increasing by 5.6% compared to quarter 2 of 2024. The average monthly rent for a house was 1,001p, and the average monthly rent for an apartment was £984. Now, compared to our rental market and where our average rents are, which is around 1,300 and something a month, that sounds quite low. But I suppose everything is different, isn't it? It's all relative. So it's interesting to see that they are getting to the point of being the highest value that they've had in a while. Even their sales market has taken an upturn, with recent activity, again, Q4 of 2025, around 550,000 newly agreed sales in the house market, which was an increase of 6.4%, with the average house price being 235,000. Again, that sounds quite low to us, but realistically, for Northern Ireland, that's quite a jump. That really is quite a jump. Come on, is it buying more rent to buy 3 months rent arrears before Section 8 can be served, then take 2? I don't know what you're talking about. I need more context. Send me a message and I'll answer your question, but that makes no sense, I'm afraid. So moving on to LandlordToday. Our headline here is Landlord fined for profiting from tenants living in danger. Da, da, da. So this goes on. A London council has prosecuted a landlord of a property for letting an unlicensed HMO and failing to meet fire safety and maintenance standards. During an inspection in May 2025, the property in Kilburn, North London, so this would have been Camden Council, found 5 unrelated tenants living in a property. Therefore, it was an HMO. It was unlicensed. Officers also identified multiple hazards, including a lack of a carbon monoxide detector, items blocking the fire escape. Well, is that the landlord's fault or the tenant's fault? Identified multiple hazards, including lack of fire safety doors to the flat entrance, kitchen and bathroom. It goes on to say they also found significant disrepair and mould growth in the bathroom. Again, would that be a tenant situation? Benjamin George Wilson of Barnet did not appear at Highbury Magistrates Court and was found guilty in his absence of 5 offences committed under the Housing Act of 2004. These related to letting of an unlicensed HMO and failing to comply with multiple regulations under Section 234 of the Act. Wilson was ordered to pay just over £15,000, £2,500 for each of the 5 offences and a surcharge of £2,000 and prosecution costs of £1,372. A council spokesman said, this landlord profited from residents living in dangerous conditions and failed to comply with the care and the legislation. I'm pleased that this has been handled and that fines have been robust and the work of the enforcement officers has been completed. Everyone deserves to live in a safe home. I agree with that. And absolutely, landlords who behave like that should be prosecuted. Absolutely, 100%. I just wonder, was there an agent involved in any way? We tend to find there was a report that I spoke about last week, a news article last week, where there was a letting agent involved and the letting agent didn't do anything either. So I just wonder, it's becoming, I don't know whether it's just being reported more that agents aren't doing what they should be doing or whether agents are just becoming more lazy. I'm not sure what it is. Lazy and ignorant. I don't know. Anyway. And my final one today is in LandlordZone. And this is a piece, it's a column piece by Sean Hooker. He is the head of redress at the Property Redress Scheme. And the headline here is what every landlord should think about before redress rolls out. And Sean goes on to explain that the private landlord database will be launched later this year. It'll be rolled out at some point in 2026 and all landlords will be legally required to be a member of this new database. You won't be able to rent a property out without it. You won't be able to evict a tenant if you're not on the database or if your details aren't updated correctly. The only caveat to that is antisocial behaviour grounds. 7A and 14 will be the only 2 that you can evict if you're not on the database. But Sean basically goes on to say, while the change feels like it's a long way off, people need to be aware of what they're going to need to do. Everything will need to go on this database. So landlord's contact information, name, address, email, phone number. If there's an agent, then basically the agent's details will need to go on there as well. The landlord at the moment, the way the legislation is written, can't be a care of address. It has to be the landlord's address. So there's going to be a GDPR uproar. Everything else will need to go on there that's related to the property. So all of your compliance documents, your gas safety, your EPC, your EICR, your deposit protection, licenses for your HMOs, all of those will need to be on the database as well. Sean goes on to say, from a redress perspective, the majority of cases we see are not driven by one party acting unscrupulously or unreasonably. They are more about missed opportunities to resolve early issues. If I was speaking to landlords before disputes ever escalated rather than after they would have reached a more formal stage, there would be fewer practical principles, and I would always emphasise that mediation and negotiation and communication is key. I absolutely agree with that. As a mediator myself, I find that we get much better outcomes if we are communicating with landlords and tenants at an earlier stage. It's emotional for a lot of people when you come to mediation, but we tend to get better results because it's informal, and I think that's important. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this database and the Ombudsman works. There is going to be a fee, but I understand that the fee is going to be quite minimal. I think it's going to be around like 50 quid. So not too dramatic. So those are the news headlines for you today. I will go back into the comments and see if I can answer any questions, but some of those questions just didn't make sense this morning. So catch me again tomorrow, 9 AM. See you later.